The twins rose out of the river mist like something grown, not built. Two pale towers rooted in the dark water, joined by a stone spine that arched over the green fork's slow, cold flow. Pennants snapped from every parapet. Blue and silver, the twin towers' sigil of House Frey, but even at a distance Jon thought they looked less like proud banners and more like scraps of cloth left to dry on bare bones. The northern host moved toward them in a long, ragged column. Armor clinked. Hooves squelched in the churned mud. Men talked in low voices, glancing sideways at the towers as they came fully into view. The river spread out on either side, brown and sluggish, broken into glittering shards where the weak sunlight caught it. Robb rode at the head, crown gleaming dimly beneath his hood. The weight of it seemed heavier today. His face was drawn, the lines at the corners of his eyes deeper. Beside him, Catelyn Stark sat her horse with the straight-backed poise of someone who had learned long ago not to show the ache in her spine. Jon rode on Robb's other side, the wildling fur over his shoulders marking him out as something that did not quite belong. Ghost loped ahead, a white specter on the river's edge, sniffing the air. Gray Wind trotted further out, nearer the Frey-controlled bank, hackles faintly raised. As they drew closer, horns sounded from the towers. Thin, reedy notes that seemed more annoyed than welcoming. Men lined the battlements, small from where Jon rode, but unmistakable in posture. Spearmen, archers, guards, and patched mail. Jon saw no warmth in their stance, only a wary, calculating stillness. "Walder Frey's people," Catelyn murmured. "They've multiplied since last I was here. Old Walder breeds like rabbits," the great Jon grumbled from behind them. "Fills his towers with bastards and grandsons, then wonders where all his bread goes." "Bread we need," Robb said quietly. "And his bridge." His gaze flicked to Jon. "Remember the plan." "I do," Jon said. They had gone over it again and again the night before, until Jon could have recited it in his sleep. Men placed in the hall with orders to watch the rafters as much as the door. A northern bard primed to turn the rains of Castamere sour with one wrong note. Ghost aloud at Jon's feet, Gray Wind close to Robb. Tormund and a hand-picked knot of his wildlings granted the right to stand along the hall's edges, laughing and drinking and watching. Archers in the yard told to keep their bows strung, no matter how much wine they were offered. And beyond all that, a second blade. Era and the larger part of Tormund's band had not marched openly with the host today. At dawn, they had split off, taking 1-1 and a score of wildlings and ridden upriver, where Jon had marked a place on the Blackfish's map. A shallower stretch, flanked by reeds and low scrub, where a small force might cross and move unseen through the boggy ground. If the worst came, if the hall turned into a slaughterhouse despite all their precautions, horns would sound from the north bank, and the Freys would find the wolves at their gates and the giants in their yard. It was a fragile net to set under such a high, sharp fall, but it was what they had. "Riders coming out," Carl of the Rills called, pointing with his spear. The gatehouse on the nearer bank creaked open, chains rattling. A drawbridge section thudded down over the narrower stream that separated the campsite shore from the first tower's base. A small party emerged at a trot, half a dozen mounted men, their cloaks Frey blue, their shields painted with twin towers. At their head rode a boy, or a young man, perhaps, with the rounded cheeks and uncertain seat of someone more comfortable on a bench than a saddle. His hair was the dull brown of old straw, his eyes pale and darting. He had a Frey nose, beaky and somehow petulant. "Olyvar Frey," Catelyn said under her breath. "One of his many grandsons." The Frey party reined in a little way from the northern vanguard. Olyvar raised a hesitant hand. "Your Grace," he called, voice thinned by the damp air. "I am sent to bid you welcome to the twins, on behalf of my Lord Grandfather, Lord Walder Frey, Lord of the Crossing." That sounded like it hurt him to say, Tormund muttered. Robb nudged his horse forward. "Lord Olyvar," he said, his own voice carried easily. "We come to make amends and to celebrate family joined to family. Will your grandfather receive us?" He will, Your Grace." Olyvar's gaze flicked from Robb to Jon, to Tormund, to the dire wolves, widening with each pass. He bids that certain guests be presented first, as is custom. Your Grace's good lady, of course, and Lady Stark. And he asks that the dire wolves be left outside the hall. He swallowed, for the comfort of his guests. Grey Wind bared his teeth as if he understood. No, Robb said. The Frey boy blinked. Your Grace. No, Robb repeated, calm but implacable. My wolf stays with me. My brother's wolf stays with him. If Lord Walder prefers we come to his hall without the creatures we trust with our lives, then perhaps he does not want us there at all. Olivar looked visibly torn, caught between a sullen old man's orders and the reality of the young king before him. I will tell him, Your Grace, he said at last. He did say that for such special allies as your companions. His glance skimmed Tormund and stuck like a burr. Exceptions might be considered. Tormund grinned, all teeth. Tell your lord I'm housebroken, he said. Mostly. Olivar's grimace was answer enough. They crossed in order. Robb and his close kin first, banners lowered in token of peace, though the men beneath them wore full mail and kept their hands near their hilts. Jon rode just behind, Ghost pacing at his stirrup. Tormund came beside him, his axe piece-bound with a strip of cloth that meant less than nothing if Lord Walder had truly bad intentions. Still, the gesture soothed Southern. As they passed under the gatehouse arch, Jon felt the prickling sense of being measured, weighed. Men peered down from murder holes. He imagined buckets of oil, racks of rocks, hidden archers. The stone here was damp and chill, slick in places with moss, but beneath that he could feel the old strength of it. The twins had stood for generations, taking tolls and swallowing grudges. They rode into the inner yard, where Frey men-at-arms lined up in showy ranks, shields polished, helms gleaming. Beyond them, the great hall doors stood open, spilling warm light into the cold gray. The noise from within, laughter, the rise and fall of pipes and drums, washed over them. Jon's dream whispered along his spine. The heat of the Frey hall hit Jon like a slap after the damp chill of the yard. Fires roared in great hearths along the walls, filling the air with the smells of roasting meat, spilled ale, sweat, and old smoke. Tapestries sagged from hooks, their colors dulled by years of grease and neglect. Long trestle tables ran down the length of the chamber, already crowded with men and women in Frey blue, with a scattering of other house colors mixed among them. Bannermen, hangers-on, those who had found it profitable to orbit Walder Frey's bridge. At the far end, on a slightly raised dais, sat Lord Walder himself. He looked smaller than Jon had expected, a bag of sticks wrapped in skin, jammed into a chair too big for him. His face was a map of wrinkles, his mouth a thin, cruel line. A wheel of veins crawled along his temples. His eyes, though, were sharp and wet and bright with malice. A clutch of women clustered around him. Wives, daughters, granddaughters, some barely older than girls, others with gray in their hair. He seemed half melted into the cushions of his seat, yet there was nothing weak in the way he fixed his gaze on the approaching king. The music faltered as Robb, Catelyn, and their retinue entered. Conversation dipped, then rose again in the muttering way of a disturbed wasp's nest. Your Grace, Walder Frey rasped. His voice had the papery sound of dry leaves rubbing together. You honor my poor house at last. Lord Walder, Robb said, stopping at a respectful distance. He bowed just enough, crown glinting. I come to ask pardon for the slight I did you, and to bind our houses more closely. This is my wife, Talisa. He gestured, and the dark-haired woman at his side stepped forward, belly gently rounded beneath her gown. And my mother, Lady Stark, whom you know. Catelyn's smile was thin as the lace at her cuffs. Lord Walder, she said. Walder made a show of peering at Talisa, squinting. So, he said, you broke your word for this. He let the word hang, neither quite insult nor compliment. Too good for my daughters, were they? Or not good enough for you? I broke my word out of folly, not malice, Robb said. For that, I offer apology. And reparation. Reparation, Walder repeated, savoring it like a sweet. Yes, yes, your uncle, the Blackfish, will have one of my girls. And you'll make me feel pretty with your flattery. That's what the letters said, eh? His gaze wandered past Robb then, snagging on Jon. And what's this? A crow in wildling rags? You bring strange pets these days, your grace. Jon Snow, Jon said before Robb could answer. Bastard of Eddard Stark, brother to the king, and sworn brother of the Night's Watch. For all that I stand here now. Walder's thin lips thinned further. Night's Watch, he said. Oathbreakers and rapers in black. I know the sort. My father used to send men there when he wanted them gone but not dead. And now they come strolling into my hall in furs and tell me they're king's brothers. His gaze flicked to Ghost, who stood white and silent at Jon's heel. And what's this beast? You'll have it outside. No, Robb said, calm as before. My brother's wolf stays with him. Mine stays with me. We've come here on your sufferance, Lord Walder, but we won't place ourselves entirely at your mercy. I'm certain a host as wise as you understands caution, in guests as well as in hosts. A murmur ran through the hall at that, half disapproving, half impressed. Walder's eyes narrowed, then gleamed. Bold words, he said, for a boy who needs my bridge. He let the moment stretch, tasting the tension. Then he waved a dismissive hand. Very well, keep your beasts. If they shit on my floor, you can lick it up yourselves. Tormund chuckled, low. I like him, he murmured to Jon. He's got fangs. Shame they're all rotten. Jon kept his face still, but inside, every part of him was measuring. Lord Walder's words had been barbed, but they were not those of a man about to spring a trap this very moment. He might still plan treachery, yes, but the hall tonight was loud with careless talk, not the brittle quiet of men waiting on a signal. We thank you for your hospitality, Robb said, and we look forward to the joining of our houses. Oh, you will, Walder said. His smile was thin and unpleasant. My girls have been looking forward to this for years. Haven't you, my doves? He patted the nearest granddaughter on the arm. She flinched, but nodded on cue. Catelyn's fingers curled at her sides. She had seen too many rooms like this. Powerful men holding their kin like coin, ready to be spent. But she held her tongue. Words would not change Walder Frey. Only advantage would. Eat, Walder commanded. Drink, dance. Try not to piss on my rushes. We've slaughtered half the Riverlands for this feast. Be ashamed to see it go to waste. The pipes struck up again, a reel with a heavy beat. Servants moved, bearing trenchers and jugs. Robb was led to the high table, Catelyn at his side, Talisa beside him. Lords took their places, the great Jon booming for ale, the Blackfish's mouth a thin line of disapproval. Bolton glided to his seat like a crow to a perch, his pale eyes giving nothing away. Jon found himself placed a little way down from the high table, close enough to see Robb's face, but not central. Tormund loomed at his shoulder. Frey men glowered from nearby benches. Ghost lay under the table, tension in every muscle. The feast unfolded like a play Jon had seen once before in a dream and was now watching again in life. Only this time he was not bound to its script. Meat came first in obscene quantities. Whole roast boars with apples clenched in their teeth, haunches of venison glossed with honey, great trencher bread sodden with juices. Frey servants moved briskly, their faces carefully blank, pouring wine that never seemed to run out. The air grew thicker with heat and grease and the press of bodies. Laughter rose, too loud in places, as if men were trying a bit too hard. Robb smiled when spoken to, but his eyes flicked often to Lord Walder, weighing each gesture, each remark. Catelyn ate little, fingers tight around her cup. Talisa touched her belly more than she touched her food, as if to reassure herself that the child inside was still safe, untouched by this hall's sour air. Further down, the great Jon roared with forced mirth at some Frey jape, slamming his cup down so hard ale sloshed onto the table. The Blackfish drank sparingly, his gaze never staying in one place long. tracked the doors, the hearths, the raised musicians' platform along the left wall, where a cluster of Frey fiddlers and pipers played a riotous tune. Among them, half hidden, was a man Jon recognized. A northern bard with a mop of dark hair and clever fingers, who had once made half the hall at Winterfell weep with the Dornishman's wife. His name was Colin, though most called him Cole. He met Jon's eyes briefly and gave the tiniest of nods, then turned his attention back to his strings, plucking out a lively melody that set some of the younger Frey girls to clapping time. In the corners of the hall, northern men Jon had seen drilling that afternoon lounged with calculated nonchalance. They leaned against pillars, shared jests, tossed bones to Ghost when they thought no one was looking, but their hands never strayed far from the hilts of their swords. Archers, their quivers half hidden beneath benches, sat with their backs to the wall, laughing at Frey jokes while their eyes stayed on the rafters above. Up there, Jon saw shadows. Men, perhaps, or only tricks of firelight. It was hard to tell with the smoke coiling into the beams. But he marked each movement, each hint of metal catching the light and then vanishing. Beside him, Tormund was in his element. He drank deep, bellowed with the great Jon across the room, told an outrageous story about betting a she-bear that had half the Frey daughters blushing and half the Frey sons looking scandalized. He tossed bones under the table with deliberate aim, letting Ghost snap them up, making a show of how the direwolf was only a beast, nothing to fear. The Freys watched, uncertain whether to laugh or sneer. Fear and contempt warred in their eyes. "See them?" Tormund muttered in Jon's ear between jests. His merry mask did not slip, but his voice had a flinty edge. "Along the walls, too many spears for a feast. I've been to raids with less iron out than this." "I see," Jon said. "In the rafters too. Winch hooks, pulleys, too much rope for hanging banners." "Ha!" Tormund shouted suddenly, slapping the back of a Frey cousin hard enough to make him choke on his ale. "And then I told the giant, if you think your club is big, you should see my—" He cut himself off with a prodigious belch. Frey laughter rose, half disgusted, half genuine. Jon's hand brushed Longclaw's hilt. He felt the faint tremor in his own fingers and forced them still. Ghost's fur pressed against his boots. The direwolf's breathing was shallow, his attention fixed on the hall's edges, on currents Jon could not quite read. The musicians shifted tunes, sliding from a reel into a courtly dance. Frey girls were coaxed up from the benches, paired off with Shentons and Big Walder and half a dozen other cousins whose names blurred together. Robb stood when a particularly bold Frey daughter tugged at his sleeve, smiling as he led her into the cleared space. Talisa watched with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Walder Frey's gaze flicked from the dancers to the doors, to the musicians, to the northern men pretending to be drunk. His tongue ran along the edge of his teeth, slow and considering. "Is this it?" Jon asked himself silently. "Is this where it turns?" "Not yet," some inner sense said. "Not yet." He waited. He watched. The feast swelled like a tide. Every laugh and shout and clatter a wave that threatened to crash over the plan Jon had helped set in motion. He felt it like an itch under his skin, the sense of something building, of air thickening. Wine flowed. Men grew louder. A mummer in Frey colors tumbled through the hall, doing handstands and juggles, his painted grin stretching comically wide. The great Jon slapped the table and roared approval when the man pretended to drop a knife and then snatched it from midair at the last moment. Somewhere behind that noise, Jon heard a different rhythm. The soft thump of boots in the corridor beyond the hall doors, the creak of hidden hinges in the walls. He glanced toward the nearest pillar and caught the eye of a northern guardsman there. The man gave the slightest nod, confirming what Jon already felt. "They're moving men into position," Jon murmured. Tormund took a swig from his horn. Ale dribbled into his beard. "Let them," he said. "We've men moving too." That was true. While the Freys had been playing host, the northern host had not been idle. Men had drifted in not all at once, but in small, innocuous batches. A few more guards on the excuse of protecting the king. A few more servants to help their hosts. a handful of wildlings who had slipped in claiming to carry barrels or wood. All with eyes and ears, all with hands that knew what to do with steel when the moment came. Across the room, the northern bard Cole finished his current tune and let it trail off into a choke of laughter and applause. He bowed with an exaggerated flourish, then stepped back, making a show of examining his bow and strings. The Frey musicians conferred in low tones, one of them gesturing to him. Walder Frey, from his chair, raised a skeletal hand. "Enough of these country jigs," he rasped. The hall hushed, the way a pond goes still when a stone drops into it. "Play something proper, a song to remind us of our betters, the ones who think we'll always be waiting at their bridges with our hands out." The Frey fiddleman hesitated, then set bow to strings. The first notes slithered out, slow and menacing. A tune Jon had heard once before in King's Landing, when Tyrion Lannister had hummed it under his breath. The Rains of Castamere. His dream surged up like a wave, threatening to drown him. For a heartbeat, the hall blurred. He saw again the rafters, the crossbows, gray winds fall. Robb turning, confusion on his face. But this was not the dream. Not yet. He forced his eyes to Cole. The northern bard stood at the very edge of the musicians' group, bow poised. His face was carefully blank. The Frey fiddler glanced at him, nodded, beckoned him into the tune. Cole put his bow to the strings. The melody he drew out was the same, and not a fraction too slow on the opening phrase. A second note dragged, souring against the Freyman's proper pitch. On the fourth bar, he plucked instead of bowed, a bright, jarring pop where there should have been a smooth glide. It was subtle. A man drunk on wine and victory might not have noticed at all. Jon did. So did the Blackfish. Jon saw Brynden Tully's head lift, his gaze snapping to the musicians. The Grachan's hand stilled on his cup. Catelyn's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. Robb's smile froze, just for an instant, then resumed, slightly thinner. That was the sign. Ghost moved first. The dire wolf surged from beneath the table in a blur of white, overturning a bench with his back. A Frey cousin toppled with a yelp, wine spilling down his front. Ghost's head snapped up, muzzle lifted, nostrils flaring as he scented the air above. Then he howled. The sound cut through the hall like a blade. It was not a long howl, not the full-throated song of wolves under a winter moon. It was short, sharp, urgent, a warning. The music stumbled. Strings squealed as the Frey fiddler hand jerked. Cole, the northern bard, let his bow slide deliberately wrong over his strings, producing a loud, discordant screech that made men wince and clap hands to their ears. In that jagged sound, a door in the far wall burst open. Men in Frey colors poured through, crossbows in hand. They had likely meant to slip in while the tune played, unnoticed by eyes half-lidded with wine. Now, caught in the glare of 100 suddenly alert stares, they hesitated for a crucial heartbeat. "Robb!" Catelyn cried. The high table exploded into motion. The Blackfish overturned his chair, using it as a makeshift shield as he shoved Talisa back behind the table. The great Jon surged to his feet with a roar, seizing a roasted boar's head and hurling it like a stone at the nearest crossbowman. It struck with a meaty thud, knocking the man off balance. Jon was already moving. Longclaw came free of its scabbard with a hiss, Valyrian steel dark and hungry in the firelight. He vaulted the overturned bench and threw himself toward the nearest of the newly opened doors, where two Frey men fumbled with their crossbow strings, fingers clumsy in their haste. "Now!" he bellowed. Northern men sprang up as if they'd been launched. The ones along the walls shoved away from the stone, swords in hand. Archers in the corners knocked and drew with terrifying speed, their aim not at the guests, but at the dark slits in the rafters where shadows had stirred. The first volley of arrows flew from above. But it was not the massacre Jon had dreamed. Too many northern men were already braced, too many shields already up. An arrow clanged off the Blackfish's upturned chair. Another shattered on the Grachan's raised forearm guard. He laughed, a savage bark. One found a victim, A Karstark man took a bolt to the throat and went down in a choking spray. At the same moment, northern arrows shot upward. Hidden Frey men in the beams jerked and dropped like sacks of grain, crashing onto the tables below. One landed atop a platter, sending goose and gravy flying. Another fell half on top of a Frey daughter, who screamed and pushed him away, her gown blooming red across the bodice. Tormund Giantsbane moved like a boulder loose down a slope. He vaulted his own table, seized a Frey spearman by the collar, and drove his head into the stone pillar so hard the cracks sounded above the din blood sprayed. Tormund bellowed, "Guessed right, you goat-fucking cowards? This is how you honor it." Lord Walder's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like one of the whites Jon had burned. His eyes bulged. "What are you doing?" he shrilled at his own men. "You fools! You!" But if he had not given the signal himself, someone close to him had. Frey retainers along the walls drew blades, some with hesitation, others with grim eagerness. One lunged for Robb, dagger flashing. Gray wind hit him from the side, jaws closing on his forearm. Bones crunched. The man screamed and dropped the knife, which Robb kicked away. With his other hand, Robb seized a fallen Frey shield and raised it just in time to catch another bolt on its face. The impact staggered him, but he held his feet. "Stark men!" he shouted, voice cutting through the chaos. "To me! To me!" his bannermen answered. For a heartbeat, the hall was nothing but noise and blur and the metallic tang of blood in the air. Jon plunged into it like a swimmer into a cold river. Longclaw moved in his hand almost of its own accord, honed by hours in Castle Black's yard, by fights beyond the wall where hesitation had meant death. He parried a spear thrust from a Frey man whose face was more fear than anger, twisted, and brought the pommel of his blade down on the man's temple. The Frey crumpled. "Spare them if they throw down their weapons," Robb shouted. "Take them alive if you can." Some of his men heard, some didn't. Fear and anger and the memory of slights had been poured into this hall like so much wine. Now it spilled out in a red tide. Near the musician's platform, Cole had dropped his fiddle entirely and taken up a fallen sword. He slashed at a Frey man trying to scramble up onto the stage with a crossbow, catching him across the thigh. The man fell, and Ghost was on him in an instant, teeth burying in his shoulder. At the far end of the hall, Lord Walder shrieked for order and got none. A grandson, Edwin perhaps, or Black Walder. Jon could not keep them straight. Tried to drag him back from the high table toward a side door. The old man clung to his chair, knotted hands white. "Do something, you little shit," he screeched. This wasn't the plan. So there had been a plan. Jon's stomach turned. Even if Walder himself had not given the order to loose arrows at that precise moment. He had filled his hall with men ready to murder guests under his roof. The intent was enough. A Frey guard lunged for Catelyn, sword raised. She snatched a knife from the table and met his blade with the small bit of steel, turning it just enough to send his strike past her. He stumbled, off balance. The Blackfish was there in the next instant, driving his sword through the man's gut with a veteran's efficiency. "Behind you!" Catelyn cried. He spun, bringing his blade up in time to deflect another strike. Tormund roared a wildling war cry, swinging his axe in wide, brutal arcs that forced Frey men back. "You call this feasting?" he shouted. "This is a piss-poor excuse for an ambush. I've seen goats with more courage." Jon fought his way toward the nearest of the side doors, the one the Frey crossbowman had tried to use. Ghost stayed tight to his flank, a white guardian. Twice, Jon almost slipped on spilled wine that looked too much like blood. The air was thick with smoke and screams. At the door, a knot of Frey men tried to rally. One had a horn at his belt, fumbling to bring it to his lips. If he blew it, more guards would flood in from the towers, turning the skirmish in this hall into a full battle. Ghost launched, jaws closing on the hornbearer's wrist. The man yelped, the horn tumbling from his grasp. Jon lunged, boot kicking it away across the floor. Then he brought Longclaw up, the flat of the blade smashing into the man's jaw. Teeth flew. The man went down in a boneless heap. "Block this passage," Jon barked to the nearest Stark soldier. "Table, barrels, anything. Don't let reinforcements pour through." The man, a Mormont by his bare sigil, nodded, grabbing two comrades. Together, they heaved a heavy table up, muscles straining, and jammed it into the doorway. Men's shouts and thudding boots echoed from beyond. A spear stabbed through the gap. A northerner hammered it down with the butt of his own blade. The Freys had expected a butchery. What they had gotten instead was a fight they were not prepared for. Walder Frey seemed to realize it too. Jon saw him on his feet now, wobbling, tugging frantically at Edwin's sleeve. "Get me out," he hissed. "Get me out, you useless boy. Go." Edwin snarled at another grandson, shoving him toward the opposite door. "Get to the yard. Rally the men. We'll pin them between." He never finished. The sound hit first. A low, distant rumble, like thunder dragged over stone. The whole hall seemed to shiver with it. Men paused mid-strike, instincts made for earthquakes and avalanches making them look up, then toward the far walls. The rumble swelled, resolving into something like drums. Or feet. Very, very large feet. Tormund's face split into a grin that showed all his teeth. "Ah," he roared, "there's my giant." While steel rang and men shouted within the hall, the yard beyond the tower was becoming its own battlefield. Era had led her band along the reedy north bank, keeping low, the reeds and mist wrapping them in a veil. One waded the green fork where it ran shallowest, the water reaching only to his thighs, though it was deep enough to sweep away a lesser man. Wildlings clung to his fur like burrs, shrieking with laughter and terror both. On the far side, they had crept through mud and shadow until the twins' north-facing gate loomed above them. Now, at the first howl of ghost drifting faintly through stone, Era blew her horn. It was a deep, booming note, nothing like the thin fry horns. It made the birds in the scant trees along the riverbank explode into flight. "Now!" she shouted. "One, knock!" The giant lowered his makeshift ram, a stripped tree trunk as thick as a man's chest, and charged. Arrows hissed down from the battlements. Most clattered off the trunk or buried themselves in one's hide, provoking only snarls of irritation. One caught a wildling man in the throat. He fell without a sound, trampled an instant later under the giant's pounding feet. One hit the gate with a crash that made the world jump. Timbers groaned. Stone dust rained down. One of the gatehouse's corner parapets cracked, sending a Frey archer tumbling screaming into the yard below. Again. This time, the great wooden doors splintered in the center, a jagged crack spidering out from where the ram had struck. Wildlings shrieked with glee. Northern arrows, loosed from where Jon's men had lain in wait in the scrub, picked off Frey defenders along the walls, their gray-fletched shafts thudding into throats and chests. Inside the gate tower, men scrambled to drop the portcullis. Era saw the chain begin to move, links rattling. "Fast!" she yelled. "Before they lower it." One roared, a deep, resonant bellow that rattled teeth, and threw himself at the doors once more. This time they burst inward. Splintered planks exploded into the yard, bowling over the men who had been trying to brace them from within. The portcullis shuddered halfway down and stuck, one side jerking lower than the other, caught on bent iron. One ducked, shouldering under the descending spikes, and wrenched. With a tortured shriek, the metal tore free from its tracks, leaving a jagged opening big enough for him to force his way through. Wildlings poured in after him, spears and axes flashing. Northern men rose from their cover and charged as well, stark banners suddenly blooming out of the mist on this unexpected side of the castle. Frey men in the yard, who had been hurrying toward the hall at the sound of distant fighting, faltered, caught between two threats. Some turned to face the giant battering into their midst. Some froze, confusion written starkly on their faces. The first to reach them was a Mormont soldier, bare sigil dark on his sodden cloak. He slammed into a Frey pikeman, driving him back toward one's swinging ram. "King in the north," he bellowed. The cry was taken up, echoing off stone. "King in the north! King in the north!" From within the hall, faint but growing, came another chorus. The same words roared over the clash of steel. The twins, which had thought itself the trap, was suddenly the thing caught. The tremor rolled through the hall like a giant stepping, a shudder that sent cups jumping and dust sifting down from the rafters. Men staggered. A crack appeared in the plaster near the hearth, spreading in a jagged line. "That'll be the door," Tormund crowed, eyes bright. "Your folk at the gate, Snow. Or mine. Or both." Walder Frey's composure finally cracked. "What was that?" he squealed, clutching at Edwin. "What have you done, you little shits? You said it would be clean. Quick. Not this." Edwin's face was bloodless. "Father, grandfather, whatever you want me to call you, we have to get you out. The Northmen," Robb's voice cut in, "are not leaving." He had fought his way clear of the immediate press at the high table, gray wind flanking him, Catelyn and Talisa sheltered behind overturned benches. Blood streaked his cheek where a glancing cut had nicked him, but his eyes were clear, his sword steady. Northern men were rallying around him, forming a rough shield wall between their king and the bulk of the Frey host. Jon pushed through the press toward them, Ghost fighting at his side, snapping at any blade that came too close. A Frey retainer lunged. Longclaw turned his thrust aside, then bit into his arm just deep enough to send his sword clattering. Jon knocked him to the floor with the flat of his blade. "Yield and live," he snarled. The man stared up at him, panting, then let his head fall back, eyes squeezed shut, hands spread. "I yield," he rasped. "7 spare me." "7 might," Tormund said, planting a boot on the man's chest as he stepped past. "Can't speak for the rest of us." They reached the space before the dais as another rumble shook the hall. A breath later, the main doors slammed inward. A wildling woman in furs burst through, Era's braids swinging, her knife already red. "Gates down," she shouted. "Yards ours. Giants in your courtyard, Frey." Her grin was savage. "He's pissing on your well." The announcement struck the hall like a new blow. Frey men, who had already been wavering after their failed surprise, visibly faltered. The fight went out of some. Others grew more desperate, eyes rolling whites. "Drop your weapons," Robb bellowed above the din. "Frey men, drop your weapons and you will live. This is your one chance." For a moment no one moved. Then a man near the back. A Frey bastard, by the look of him, his cloak cheap, his boots worn, let his sword clatter from his hand. He raised both arms high. "I yield," he called. "I never wanted this." Another followed, then another. Not all. Some, like Edwin, clung to their steel as to their pride. But enough. Jon saw a line shift, the tide of motion in the hall changing shape. What had been chaos began to become something like order, if order could be born in a room spattered with blood and overturned benches. "Get those who dropped their blades against the walls," the Blackfish shouted. "Disarm them. Bind them if you can." Northern men surged to obey. One of the Mormonts, Meech herself perhaps in her mail and bare cloak, shouldered past a Frey man and slammed him into a pillar, her knee in his gut as she ripped his sword from his hand. On the dais, Lord Walder Frey clung to his chair with both hands, shaking. Spittle glistened at the corners of his mouth. "You can't," he croaked. "You can't. This is my hall, my bridge. You're my guests." "We were your guests," Catelyn said, stepping up beside Robb. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes hard. "You invited us in and ringed us round with men bearing hidden steel. You brought crossbowmen into your rafters. You tried to slaughter my son under your roof. You broke guest right, Walder Frey. There is no worse sin." Walder's throat worked. "I never ordered." "You laid the feast," Jon said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Every ear strained in that moment. "You set the table. You filled the hall with armed men and placed archers where no honorable host would. Whether you spoke the word yourself or only let your sons think they knew what you wanted, you are responsible." Walder's eyes flicked wildly, looking for some salvation that wasn't there. The hall was full of northern steel now, of wildling furs, of Frey men with their backs to the wall. From outside came the distant roar of one and the clash of weapons in the yard. "Please," a voice near the dais said. It was Walder Frey, who had ridden out to greet them, who now stood to the left of his grandfather's chair, his own sword still sheathed. His face was white. "Please, this wasn't." "No one's speaking of you," Robb said. His gaze was fixed on Walder. Yet, the old man sagged. For the first time, he looked truly small, not merely mean. "Do what you like, then," he muttered. You'll see what comes of spitting on your betters." "My betters taught me honor," Robb said. "My betters taught me that a man who breaks bread with a guest and then sheds his blood is no lord, only a butcher." Jon thought of Eddard Stark's hand on a boy's shoulder, guiding him to watch an execution. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Robb's hand tightened on his hilt. "Take him," Catelyn said softly. There was no triumph in it, only a deep, weary sorrow. "Take him and those sons who plotted this. The others, bastards, grandchildren, wives, they need not pay for his sins. But those who stood with him in this, who brought steel into their hands when they should have served bread, that guilt is theirs." The Blackfish stepped forward, his face as hard as the blade in his hand. "Lord Walder Frey," he said, "by the laws of the Riverlands, by the guest right you've broken, you are forfeit." Walder bared his teeth. "You won't hang me," he spat. "I'll rot your gallows with my curse." "No," Robb said. "We won't hang you." He looked to Jon. For a heartbeat, Jon felt the weight of that glance like the cold of the wall. Then he stepped forward, Longclaw in his hand. "This is your right," Jon said quietly to Robb. "He wronged you, not me." Robb's throat bobbed. "He wronged more than me," he said. "He wronged every man in this hall he meant to see die with a cup in his hand. He wronged the laws our father taught us. I am king and I am Stark, but I am also a son whose father taught me what justice is. And He faltered, just for a heartbeat, the weight of crown and sword and all the eyes on him pressing down. Catelyn's hand touched his arm. "You don't have to swing it," she murmured. "You can order it done." "He does," Jon said, remembering another winter's day in a snowy godswood. "Or he won't sleep tonight, or any night after." Robb looked at him, something like gratitude and pain mixed in his gaze. Then he nodded. "I am Robb of House Stark," he said, turning his face to the hall, voice ringing strong despite the blood on his cheek. "By the laws of guest right upheld in the North and the Riverlands, by the oaths my house has sworn and by the crown I bear, I judge Walder Frey guilty of treachery and of attempted murder under his own roof." Walder sagged further in his chair. For all his talk of curses, there was little dignity left in him. Only a shriveled, terrified man who had thought himself untouchable on his bridge. "Edwin Frey," Robb continued, his gaze shifting to the nearest of Walder's adult sons, who stood with his sword still in hand, knuckles white. "And those sons who planned and supported this ambush, we will judge each of you in turn. For now, you will be disarmed and held. Resist, and you'll join him in sentence." He glanced at Jon once more. Jon stepped forward until he stood before Walder, Longclaw in both hands. Ghost came to his side, muscles tense but still. Walder's eyes, bright with terror, locked onto Jon's. "Please," he croaked, "think of what this means. I hold the bridge, my house. You kill me, you make enemies of all. You made enemies when you filled this hall with steel," Jon said. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You lost your right to mercy when you broke the oldest law we have." He remembered another man kneeling in the snow, a deserter from the Night's Watch, eyes wild as he spoke of white shadows and dead men walking. Eddard Stark had looked grim, but not cruel as he swung the sword. "This is the man's duty, Jon," he had said later. "The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword." Jon was not Robb, but he was Stark enough for this. "For what you intended," he said to Walder. "For those you meant to see dead, for the laws you spat on, I sentence you to die." Walder's mouth opened, some last curse or plea gathering. Longclaw fell in a clean, dark arc. It was swift. The old man's head tumbled, the look of astonished outrage frozen on his features. Blood sprayed, hot and bright, across the dais, spattering Jon's boots. For a moment the hall seemed to inhale. Then the sound came, a rough, ragged cheer, born of fear released. Northern men thumped their fists against their chests. Some Freys flinched. Others sagged in what might have been relief, their eyes going to the headless body of their patriarch with something like loathing. Robb let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His shoulders straightened, as if a weight had shifted rather than simply been added. "Gather the bodies," he said. His voice was hoarse, but steady. "Tend the wounded. Secure the towers and the yards. We will not make this place a charnel house. The twins will stand, but under different masters." He looked at Jon. "Can your wildlings help keep order, without starting another war in these halls?" Tormund snorted. "We can try," he said. "We've kept worse camps from eating each other, but we'll want some of your folk at our backs. These Freys look like they'd stab their own mothers for a better seat." "Some of them," Era said. Her gaze was sharp, measuring the room. "Others might be glad to be rid of him." Catelyn wiped a fleck of blood from her cheek with the corner of her sleeve. Her eyes were on Jon. "You've changed," she said quietly. "But some things in you are very much your father's." Jon did not know whether that comforted or condemned him. He only knew that his hands shook as he cleaned Longclaw's blade on Walder Frey's abandoned cloak. Morning came thin and colorless, the sky over the green fork a sheet of pearl. Mist clung to the river, wrapping the stone legs of the twins in gauzy swathes. The yard smelled of damp and ash and the lingering iron of blood, but the worst of the stains had been washed away, scrubbed by hands that had shaken as they worked. The hall had been cleared. Bodies, Frey and Northern both, had been laid out in a smaller chamber, shrouded with whatever cloth could be found. The septon attached to the Frey household had prayed over them in a reedy voice that trembled when it reached Walder's bier. Some men had muttered that the old lord deserved no words at all. Catelyn had insisted that the dead be given what rights they were owed, even if their lives had been fouled by treachery. Now, in the courtyard, the living sorted themselves into new shapes. Frey men who had thrown down their weapons early stood along one wall, stripped of blades but not of dignity. Those who had fought to the bitter end and survived were bound and watched. They would be judged in days to come, each man's guilt weighed. Bastards and grandchildren moved quietly, their eyes hollow, as if a long-held terror had finally been replaced by a grim, uncertain freedom. Wildlings and Northmen walked patrols together, their unease half covered by rough jests. "You lot fight like half-trained goats," a Mormont woman said, bumping shoulders with a spearwoman from beyond the wall. "Aye? And you fight like one-armed bears," the wildling retorted. "But at least you bite." One sat by the shattered gate, picking fragments of arrows from his thick hide with surprisingly delicate fingers. He rumbled to himself in his own tongue, occasionally baring his teeth in what might have been a grin when a splinter came free. Robb and Jon walked the wall walk above the yard, their cloaks snapping in the cold wind. Ghost and gray wind padded behind, step for step, the direwolf's breath steaming. Below, the bridge stretched between the towers, its stones slick with moisture. Men had walked that span in the night, checking for sabotage, for hidden traps. They had found none. Walder Frey had trusted in his haul and his numbers. It had not been enough. "You saved me," Robb said at last, breaking a long silence. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. "If you hadn't come, if I'd walked into this hall thinking only of mended alliances and pretty words." "It was more than me," Jon said. "Tormund, Era, your men. My dream only gave us the shape of the danger. We still had to choose to believe it." "Still," Robb said. He looked down at the yard, at the mingled mass of fur and mail, of wildlings and Northmen. You changed the tale. Whatever songs they sing of this night, they'll have to find a new name for it. No red wedding. Jon thought of the blood that had still been spilled. Less than the dream had promised, but enough to stain memory. There was still red, he said, just not all ours. Robb's mouth twisted. No, he agreed, not all ours. They walked a few paces more. What now? Jon asked. It was a simple question that held whole winters in it. Robb drew in a breath that misted the air. Now I honor my word, he said. The Blackfish will marry his Frey bride. We'll keep those Freys who bent the knee under close watch, but we won't slaughter a house for the sins of one man. The twins will be held in the king's name, a Stark garrison. Frey blood, where it's clean enough to keep the tolls moving. He glanced at Jon. And now I think of the north, of Winterfell, of the Wall. Mance is still coming, Jon said. He won't know what happened here. He'll only know that some of his men left his host and didn't return. He'll push against the wall with all he has. And you think we should open it, Robb said. He did not make it a question. Not for all at once, Jon said. Not yet. The Watch will fight him. They must. That's their purpose. But after, when the dead come in greater numbers than any man alive has seen, you will need every living soul who can hold a spear at your side. Free folk or no. Robb leaned his forearms on the parapet, staring north, though the wall itself was only a line in his mind from here. My lords will scream, he said. They already think me half mad for trusting so much to a bastard's dream, he said. If I tell them I mean to break bread with the same wildlings, to grant them land. That's what kings are for, Jon said. To do what's needed, not what's easy. Robb snorted softly. You sound like father, he said. A beat. You looked like him last night. Jon didn't answer. There was nothing he could say to that would not feel like a lie. Below, in the yard, Tormund barked laughter as he instructed a cluster of Frey men in the proper way to brace a spear against a charging giant, using one's shins as a purely theoretical target. Era walked among them, correcting grips, cuffing ears. They'll never make free folk out of these tower rats, Tormund called up when he saw Jon watching. But we can make 'em die a little slower when the dead come. That's all any of us can hope for, Jon said. Robb straightened. When this is ordered, he said, when we've seen to Winterfell and are dead, come north with me. Stand before my lords in my hall. Tell them what you've seen. Speak of the Whites and the others of Mance Raider's host. I'll stand at your side. So will Mother. So will any man here who heard ghosts howl and lived. They'll call me Turncloak, Jon said. Oathbreaker. They'll call you alive, Robb replied. And they'll hear you because I'll make them. Because the king they follow nearly died in a Frey hall and didn't, thanks to a bastard brother who chose duty over comfort. Jon looked at him, at the crown, at the man beneath it. I'll come, he said, if the wall still stands. If the Watch will have me back long enough to let me go again. They will, Robb said firmly. Or they'll. I'll answer to the king in the north. His mouth quirked. And to Tormund Giantsbane, if he hears they've done you wrong. A low, answering howl rose from the yard, where Ghost and Grey Wind had begun a circling dance, sniffing each other, tails lifted. Jon felt it in his bones, that sound wild and clean in the damp morning air. The Red Wedding had not happened. Instead, another story had taken its place. One of blood and steel, of broken oaths and kept ones, of a bridge taken rather than a king lost. Ahead, winter still waited, with dead men in its train and a wall between. But for the first time in many nights, as Jon rested his hand on Ghost's head and watched the pale sun struggle through the mist, he felt that the realm might yet have a chance, not because the gods had shown him a fate, but because men had chosen to defy it. They left the twins as the first pale smear of dawn crept over the green fork, touching the tower's stone faces with ghostly light. The bridge stones were slick with mist. The river below moved slow and dark, as if reluctant to leave the night behind. Robb led the column across, Grey Wind pacing ahead, his gray fur bristling. Jon rode close at his shoulder, Ghost trotting with easy grace, paws silent on the damp stone. Behind them came Catelyn and the Blackfish, the Great Jon, Mage Mormont, and a hand-picked company of northern and riverland men. Among them rode Tormund Giantsbane and Era, their wildling furs a rough contrast to stark wool. One followed on foot, the bridge shuddering faintly with each of his ponderous steps. "You're sure it'll hold him?" Tormund called, glancing down at the river swirling far below. "Be a shame if we lost a giant to some southern mason's shoddy work." "The Freys built this bridge to hold half their brood at once," the Blackfish replied. "If it breaks under your overgrown friend, I'll call it the first honest thing Walder Frey ever built." One rumbled something in his own tongue, a sound like distant thunder. Tormund laughed, clapping his thigh. "He says if it falls, he'll grab the bridge and use it as a club." The jest rolled back along the column, loosening some of the tightness in men's faces. They needed that. The night in the Frey Hall had left its mark, shadows under eyes and a stiffness in limbs that had nothing to do with sleep lost. Catelyn's gaze lingered on the towers as they passed through the final gate. Men moved along the walls, stark guard cloaks already mixed among Frey blue. Oliver Frey stood on one parapet, hand raised in farewell, his face solemn. He had bent the knee the night before, along with a handful of others who had clearly never loved their grandsire's ways. Their loyalty would be watched, but it was something. "Do you trust them?" Robb asked quietly, following his mother's gaze. "I trust some of them," she said. "Enough to hold this place until we can spare more men. Enough to keep the tolls moving and the river lords from tearing it down stone by stone. That we'll have to do." Robb nodded. "We'll send Lord Mallister men when we can," he said. "Or leave Blackfish here once the riverlands are settled." "You'll leave someone you trust," Catelyn said, "before you ride into greater storms." She looked north. The word storms had always meant war to her. Now it meant winter as well, and things that walked within it. When they had crossed fully into the riverlands, Robb called a halt long enough to address the assembled riders. His crown glinted under the thin light. The wind tugged at his cloak, snapping the direwolf standard above his head. "Men of the North," he said. "Men of the Trident. We came here to make peace with House Frey. Instead we found treachery. We have answered it with justice. The twins now stand under stark authority, and the crossing is secure." A low murmur of approval ran through the ranks. "But our work isn't done," Robb continued. "Winterfell is burned. The North has bled. And beyond the wall, a threat gathers that cares nothing for whose banner flies where. We ride north to see it with our own eyes." He gestured to Tormund, Era, the wildlings. "These folk once called us enemy as we called them. They have seen the dead walk. They have fought them. They ride with us now, not as prisoners but as witnesses. Listen to what they say as we go. Remember it when the time comes to choose between old hatreds and new survival." The Great Jon grunted, folding thick arms across his chest. "I'll listen," he muttered. "Doesn't mean I'll like it." "That's more than some lords would promise," Tormund said cheerfully. "I've had worse welcomes. Usually they come with arrows." Jon said nothing. He watched the faces in the crowd. The curiosity, suspicion, open hostility in a few, wary respect in others. It would not be easy, but then, nothing worth doing ever had been in his life. "Form up," Robb said. "We ride." They turned their horses toward the King's Road, toward Moat Cailin and the bottleneck of the Neck, toward the long cold stretch of land between there and the wall. The river mist thinned behind them, swallowed by the steel-gray morning. The story that would be told of the twins had changed. Now they would see if the North could change with it. The Neck greeted them with its usual hospitality, that is to say, with mud, mist, and the feeling of a cold hand closing around the throat of the land. Moat Cailin loomed out of the bog like the bones of some long-dead giant. Its once proud towers had sunk and slumped over the centuries, stones tilting at odd angles, their tops lost to creeping ivy and moss. The causeway that threaded through the swamps to reach it was narrow and treacherous, flanked on all sides by reeds and dark water that hid gods knew what beneath. "Ugly place," Tormund observed, wrinkling his nose as his horse squelched through another patch of blackened muck. "Smells like a giant's arse. It's held more armies at bay than any fair castle ever built," the Blackfish said. "You don't need pretty when you have choke points and disease." Men rode single file along the stone spine, eyes on the murky water. Here and there, half-rotted corpses jutted from the bog. Men in rusted mail, banners long since rotted from their poles, armor eaten by corruption. The swamp preserved and devoured both, keeping its trophies like some sullen god. Wildlings eyed the place with open distrust. "This is mad," muttered Rag, the scar-faced raider who had ridden with Jon from the wall. "Land shouldn't move like this." "It always moves," Era said. "You just never noticed it before." One trudged alongside the causeway, careful to place each enormous foot where the ground looked most solid. Even so, he sank to the knee in one patch, letting out a string of giant words that made Tormund bark laughter. "Southron wars," Tormund said to Jon, shaking his head. "You lot build stone throats for your enemies to choke on, and then wonder why the air smells like death. It saved the North more than once," Jon said. "Bolton men used it against the Ironborn not long ago." He did not say what else he was thinking, that this would be one of the places he would propose for wildling settlement, if it came to it. Hard land, aye, but familiar in its treachery. Free folk knew how to live where the world itself tried to kill them. In the shadow of the leaning towers, they made camp on a rare patch of relatively dry ground. Fires sputtered, reluctant in the damp. Men huddled close to share warmth, eyeing the surrounding gloom. Jon sat with Robb and Catelyn near a small blaze sheltered by a fallen stone. Ghost lay at his feet, chin on paws, ears twitching at every splash in the distance. Gray wind ranged wider, restless, his gray shape appearing and disappearing in the mist. "Did you ever think we'd ride this road like this?" Robb asked, staring into the fire. "With wildlings at our backs and Freys behind us in chains?" "I used to dream of riding south to Turney's," Jon said, "seeing the wall from the other side, wearing a sword with a hilt of rubies. Stupid boys' dreams." "They weren't stupid," Robb said. "They were just small." He glanced at Tormund, who was attempting to teach a pair of northern soldiers a wildling drinking song that mostly involved shouting obscenities at the wind. "The world is bigger than we knew." Catelyn sipped from her cup, the bitter ale doing little to warm her. She watched the mingling of her son's men and these free folk with a wary eye. The distrust was still there, knotty and thick, but here and there she saw laughter, exchanges of food and knives and stories. Men who had nearly killed each other on sight days ago now argued over whose winters were harsher. "What will you offer them?" she asked Jon quietly. "When the time comes." "In truth, land," Jon said, "south of the wall. Some in the gift, some further. Forests where they can hunt. Hills where they can build. A chance to live without running from wights and ice both." "And what will you ask in return?" "Their spears," Jon said, "their eyes on the wild places, their promise that when the dead come, they'll stand with us and not against." Catelyn's gaze turned to the swamp. Mists curled like pale fingers between the reeds. "You're asking them to change everything they've believed," she said. "I'm asking everyone to," Jon replied. "Them, the North, the Watch." She said nothing, but her hand tightened on her cup. Somewhere in the distance, a marsh bird called, a sound like a lost soul. The next day, they crossed out of the neck and into the North proper. The air changed. It grew sharper, clearer, with a taste of snow on the wind even though the ground was still mostly bare. Men's backs straightened. Even the horses seemed to sense they were stepping onto a different story. For Jon, every mile north felt like a thread tightening. The wall loomed in his mind, a white line pulling him onward. Beyond it, Mance's host waited, and beyond that, shadows with blue eyes. They reached Winterfell on the 5th day after leaving Moat Cailin, or what was left of it. The castle rose out of the northern plain like a wounded beast, its proud lines broken, its towers burned and slumped. Smoke no longer rose from its chimneys, but the black scars of fire crawled up the stone like fingers. The great hall's roof had caved partially in. One side of the main keep was a jagged gap of collapsed masonry. Snow had begun to gather in the hollows of the ruined courtyard, white patches against the char. They halted on a low hill overlooking the wreck, men falling silent as the new shape of home revealed itself. Robb stared. His face went very still, all expression locked down behind a mask that reminded Jon painfully of Ned Stark in the worst of times. Only the flex of his jaw, the whiteness of the knuckles gripping his reins, betrayed anything. Catelyn's breath hitched, audible in the sudden hush. "Gods," she whispered. "Ned's hall." Jon felt his own choked in his chest. He had known Winterfell was burned. He had heard the tales, Ironborn raiders, Ramsay Snow's treachery, Theon Greyjoy's desperate bid for glory gone to rot. But knowing and seeing were different things. Memory overlaid itself on the ruin. He saw ghosts of stone where stone now lay in rubble, the old gray walls whole and solid, the familiar slope of the first keep, the steaming, comforting plumes from the hot springs. He saw himself and Robb running across the yard, practiced swords in hand. Arya perched on the battlements, legs kicking. Bran clambering up the broken tower with reckless joy. Sansa walking with Septa Mordane, hands folded, eyes wide. All gone, or changed beyond recognition. Gray wind paced along the hill's edge, hackles raised, nostrils flaring. Ghost sat, a white shadow at Jon's boot, his eyes fixed not on the ruin but on the land around it, as if he looked for threats in the present, not ghosts of the past. Tormund reined in beside Jon, squinting down at the shattered walls. "This your home?" he asked, voice unusually subdued. "It was," Jon said. Tormund blew out a breath. "Looks like a place the dead would love," he said. "Ruins, holes, no warmth. I've seen worse up north, but not by much." Era's eyes went to Robb. Her expression softened, briefly. "Castles fall," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone. "Halls burn. Stones can be stacked again. Not the ones in our heads," Jon thought, but he didn't say it. Robb nudged his horse forward. "We go down," he said, voice rough. "I won't ride past my own gates like a stranger on the road." The party descended the hill in a slow, solemn trickle. The gates of Winterfell hung askew, one leaf blackened and half-sagged, the other gone entirely, a gap where a battering ram or fire had done its work. The moat stank, stagnant water fouled by ash and debris. The drawbridge was gone. Rough planks had been laid in its place by some later party, long after the battle. Inside the walls, the courtyard felt larger, emptier. The familiar clutter of life, wagons, practice dummies, stacks of firewood, had been swept away by flame and opportunists both. Burned-out shells of wagons jutted like broken ribs. The great hall's doors lay off their hinges. One snapped in two. Robb dismounted without a word. He walked, step by step, across the courtyard, boots crunching on charcoal and shattered stone. Catelyn followed, skirts brushing ash. Jon came after, ghost at his side. Wary, even here he knew men or worse things might lurk. They stood before the great hall's wrecked entrance. "I used to hide behind that door," Robb said. His voice seemed to come from far away. "When Father had guests I didn't want to see. You'd drag me out by the boots. You dragged me more often," Jon said. "You'd say, 'If I have to listen to Lord Glover's hunting tales, so do you.'" A ghost of a smile flickered at Robb's mouth and vanished. They stepped inside. The hall's roof had collapsed in places, letting gray light slant through in broken spears. Birds nested in the high beams that remained, their droppings pale streaks down the blackened stone. The dais at the far end where the high table had once stood was a jumble of scorched timber. The long tables themselves had been reduced to charred lengths and ash. For a moment, Jon saw it as it had been, the warmth of 100 candles, the smells of roasting meat and fresh bread, the sound of music and laughter. Ned Stark in the high seat, Catelyn at his side. Robb and the other children along the benches. Himself, half in the shadows, half leaning toward the light. Then the vision dissolved, and only ruin remained. Catelyn sank to one knee and picked up a piece of scorched wood. It crumbled in her fingers, smearing black on her skin. "We'll rebuild," she said, more fiercely than Jon would have expected. "We must. Winterfell is more than stone. It's..." Her voice broke, just a little. "It's who we are." Robb looked at her at the hall at the ghosts. "We will," he said. "We'll raise its walls higher. We'll make its hearths burn hotter. But not yet." He turned to Jon. "First, we deal with the wall." Jon nodded. The wall, which had once seemed so far from all this, so separate. Now the threads between them were stark and clear. If the wall fell, there would be no Winterfell to rebuild, no north to reclaim. Behind them, wildlings shuffled in the doorway, peering in at the ruined hall. Some snorted contempt at the Southern's attachment to their stone boxes. Others looked with something like envy. "Always wanted a roof didn't leak," Rag muttered. "Even a broken one's more than most of us had." Jon stored that away. He thought of wildling children running in this yard, of their laughter mixing with the crackle of the godswood's leaves. The image felt both wrong and right, like a new scar. They left Winterfell by midday, the fire-blackened walls receding behind them like a bad memory. But Jon carried it with him, the ruin, sitting heavy beside the vision of the wall and the coming war. If they failed up there, this would not be the worst ruin he'd see. The wall rose slowly out of the northern horizon, more sensed at first than seen. A feeling of looming weight, of the world's edge drawing near. Then it was there, unmistakable. A colossal cliff of ice, stretching from east to west beyond the reach of sight, its face catching what little light eked through the cloud cover, turning it into a dull, cold glow. Riding toward it from the south felt different than watching it from the north. Jon had spent months with its shadow at his back. Now it was the thing ahead, the final line. 7 bloody hells, the great Jon muttered, staring up. "I forget how big the bastard is until I see it again." "Too big," Tormund said. "Man shouldn't be able to make a thing like that. It's not natural." "It wasn't just men," Jon said quietly. "Not if the old stories are true." "Old stories," Tormund snorted. "Always your old stories, Crow." Robb's gaze was fixed on the looming ice. "You took your vows up there," he said to Jon. "On top of the world." "It feels that way the first time," Jon said. "Then you get used to the wind trying to cut your face off." Just visible along the wall's height were the dark shapes of crenellations, and at one point, the outline of a tower, castle black. Smoke trailed from its chimneys, thinner than Jon remembered, like breath in winter. As they drew closer, a horn sounded faintly from the ramparts. One blast, long and low. "Brothers on the wall have seen us," Jon said. "They'll be wary. Riders approaching from the south with wildlings among them isn't something they expect." "How will they know you're not leading an attack?" Robb asked. Jon almost smiled. "Because if I meant to attack Castle Black from the south, I'd have more men and fewer banners." His gaze sharpened. "Still, we go carefully." As they reached the edge of the cleared land before the castle, a cluster of black-cloaked men rode out to meet them. Their horses were lean, their armor battered, but they sat their saddles straight. At their head rode a thin man with a face like a hawk's and a mouth used to sneering. Ser Alliser Thorne. Beside him, shorter, rounder, his cloak askew, was Samwell Tarly. Jon's chest tightened. Sam's eyes went wide as saucers when he saw the host behind Jon, and wider still when he recognized him. "Jon," he breathed. "You, Jon Snow," Alliser said at the same moment, his tone flat and chilly. "We had word you'd gone over to the wildlings and vanished. I'd hoped the stories of your crawling back were just that. Stories. They're more complicated than that," Jon said. "Ser Alliser, Sam." He dipped his head in greeting to his friend. "We come in peace, under the direwolf, not any other banner. We bring warning and aid." Alistair's gaze flicked to Robb, to the crown, to the ranks of northern men and wildlings. "You bring trouble," he said. "That much I can see from here." Sam's gaze skittered from Jon to Tormund to one, whose presence caused his mouth to flap soundlessly for a moment. "Gi giant," he squeaked. There's a giant." "There is," Jon said. "And there will be more, if we're to stand against what's coming." Alistair's eyes narrowed. "Mance Rayder is what's coming," he said. "His host is massed beyond the wall. We've seen their fires, heard their horns. We don't have men enough as it is. If you're here to talk terms on his behalf..." "I'm here to help you hold the wall," Jon cut in, "and to help the North see the threat with its own eyes. King Robb Stark has come with his bannermen. We ask audience with the Lord Commander." Sam's expression shifted at that. Relief flickered. "Lord Commander Mormont," he began, then stopped, Adam's apple bobbing. Jon's heart sank. "The old bear?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd heard the story from Mance's men, but some stubborn part of him had held onto a shred of doubt. "Dead," Sam said softly. "At Craster's. There was mutiny. The whites, we will tell you inside." "I'm sorry," Jon said. The grief hit him anew, fresh and sharp. "Who commands now?" "Maester Aemon advised we hold an election," Sam said. "It's unfinished. In practice, Ser Alistair leads the defense." Alistair's mouth tightened, but he didn't contradict. "Then we'll speak with Ser Alistair and Maester Aemon," Robb said, nudging his horse forward. "I am Robb Stark, king in the north. This is my mother, Catelyn Tully. My brother, Jon Snow. We've come to stand with the Watch against the wildling host, and against worse." Alistair's sneer deepened slightly at the word king, but he inclined his head. "Your Grace," he said, the title thin and grudging. "The Night's Watch takes no part in the wars of the realm. Our duty is the wall." "Then you'll have no complaint if the realm's wars come here to help you hold it," Robb said. "We won't ask you to swear to us, only to listen." Sam swallowed. "Ser Alistair," he said quietly. "The letters we sent about the White Walkers." "I've read them," Alistair said, not taking his eyes off Robb. "And I've seen things beyond the wall I'd rather not speak of." "Very well. You and your entourage may enter. Your wildlings will stay outside the gates under guard until we know their intentions are as friendly as you claim." "They're my friends," Jon said, "and allies. Tormund Giantsbane helped me keep your brothers alive on the wrong side of the wall. One has crushed more whites than we have men here. They're still wildlings," Alistair snapped, "and this is still Castle Black. You'll not bring them into our yard without cause." Robb's jaw tightened. "We're not here to fight you," he said. "Let Jon speak for us inside. Hear what we've seen. After that, we can decide together whose spears stand where." Alistair looked as if he'd swallowed something sour. He hesitated, then jerked his head in a stiff nod. "Very well. The king, his banners, and our wayward brother may enter. The rest will pitch camp along the south road. We'll keep an eye on your Jon. T. You do that," Tormund said cheerfully. "He snores louder than a falling tower." One rumbled again, unimpressed. As they rode toward the open gates, Jon glanced up at the wall's height, at the black line of the walkway. Men's shapes moved there, small against the vastness. He could feel the old oaths tugging at him like chains and like a lifeline both. Beyond this barrier, Mance's fires burned. Between them stood the Watch, the North, and a future that could be written more than one way. The library tower smelled of paper and dust and old, dry feathers. Ravens muttered in their cages outside, their calls muffled by the thick stone walls. Inside, candles guttered in sconces, pooling yellow light over stacks of scrolls and the hunched figure of Maester Aemon. He sat wrapped in furs, his sightless eyes milky, his hands thin and veined. Yet when he turned his head at the sound of their footsteps, his face was sharp with awareness. "Your Grace," he said to Robb, voice soft but steady. "You have your father's tread." Robb sank into a brief bow, more instinctive than regal. "Maester Eamon," he said, "you honor me. I never thought to stand here in this way." "None of us thought to stand where we are," Eamon said. "But the world seldom asks our leave to change." His cloudy gaze shifted, seeking, and settled unerringly on Jon. "And you, Lord Snow, I feared I would hear only of your death, not your return." "I'm no lord," Jon said automatically, "and I've done things the Watch might not forgive. We can debate the finer points of oaths once the wall is safe," Eamon said. "Tell me what you've seen, both of you, all of you." So Jon told it again, of Mance's host, of Tormund's decision, of the Whites in the ruined village, the Frey treachery turned back, the pact beginning to form between North and Free folk. He described one and the wildling bands who had already chosen to follow a different road. Robb spoke of the North's weakened state, the burned Winterfell, the scattered bannermen, the need to husband strength. He did not spare his own mistakes. He spoke also of what he'd seen in Jon's eyes and heard in his voice when he spoke of the dead. Catelyn spoke least, but when she did, it was of guest right broken and kept, of law and the cost of ignoring it. The room seemed to listen harder when she did. Sam added his own halting account of the fist of the first men, of Gilly and the baby, of the White Walker he'd stabbed with dragonglass on the way back. It screamed like ice breaking. Eamon listened to it all. Ser Alliser interjected occasionally, mostly to argue that the Watch must not become a political tool, for Robb, for Mance, for anyone. But even his protests lacked their usual acid when he spoke of the White Sam described. He had seen some things beyond the wall himself on his own forced ranging. When Jon finished, the room was quiet save for the crackle of the small fire. "The long night comes again," Eamon said at last. "I had hoped. I am an old man. My hopes no longer matter. The question is what will be done." "We hold the wall," Alliser said immediately. "With what men we have. We've faced worse odds than this." "No," Eamon said gently, turning his poor sight toward him. "We have not in living memory. The tales from the last long night speak of darkness falling from the sky, of armies of the dead that made kings and peasants equal in terror." He lifted his head toward Robb and Catelyn. "The realm may squabble over chairs of swords and whose sigil flies over which tower. The dead will sweep those away like children's stones." Robb's hand tightened into a fist on the table. "What would you have us do, Maester?" he asked. "I have an army, but it's not enough to fight a war on two fronts. I have lords who will balk at treating wildlings as anything but foes. I have a wall that isn't mine to command. And yet here you are," Eamon said, "with a chance to do more than any king has in your lifetime." His blind eyes turned back to Jon. "You've walked between these worlds, Jon Snow, crow and guest of the free folk, brother and bastard and near king's brother. What do you propose?" Jon felt every gaze in the room settle on him. The weight of it was almost as heavy as Longclaw at his hip. "Mance Rayder will not stop for pleas," he said slowly. "He means to get his people south. If we deny him completely, he'll throw them at the wall until it breaks or they all die. Then the dead will have a ready harvest. But if we offer him a way through, controlled, if the North agrees to grant land in the gift and beyond to free folk who bend a little to our ways in return for our bending a little to theirs, you'd have us open the gates to raiders," Alliser said, "to men who steal and kill our small folk." "I'd have you open the gates to families who don't want to die," Jon said, "to warriors who can stand on the wall when the dead come and hold it beside you. Not all will accept. Some will choose to fight and die in the snow. But enough might." Robb's jaw worked. "I'd need my bannermen's consent," he said. "The land around the wall belongs to houses who've held it for generations. Umber, Karstark, Manderley, Hornwood. They won't give it up easily." "Ask them which they'd rather see," Eamon said. "Wildlings in their forests and fields, paying tithes and fighting beside them when winter comes, or dead men in their halls. Men with blue eyes sitting in their chairs." Robb swallowed. Sam cleared his throat, tentative. And the watch, he ventured. Our vows say we hold no lands, take no wives. We're a wall, not a kingdom, but we also vow to guard the realms of men. If letting some in is the only way to guard them. Alliser looked as if the words pained him physically, but he did not immediately gainsay them. Aemon folded his hands. They shook only slightly. If there is to be peace between the North and the Free Folk, he said, Mance Rayder must be part of it. He leads them. His word carries weight. I am too old to go into the snow. But you! He turned toward Jon, then toward Robb, his blind gaze somehow finding them both. You can! Robb frowned. You'd have me ride beyond the wall under parley? He said. And you, Jon, back into a camp where they may call you traitor? Yes, Jon said. The word came without hesitation, surprising him a little. If that's what it takes. Catelyn sucked in a breath. Robb, I know, he said, looking at her. It's mad. Dangerous. But we can't sit on one side of the wall while Mance's host on the other side decides our fate without us. We have to go. Together. Alliser made a disgusted sound. If you get yourselves killed in the haunted forest because you thought you could talk sense into a king of raiders and a pack of snow savages, don't expect the Watch to march out to save you. No, Jon said. We'll expect the Watch to hold the wall. That's all. Maester Aemon's mouth twitched in what passed, on his worn face, for a smile. I am an old man, he repeated. I have seen Targaryens crowned and fall. I have seen summers that lasted a lifetime. I will not see the end of this winter, but I would like to die knowing that someone tried to make more of men than their fear. He reached out, groping, and Sam guided his hand to rest on Jon's arm. The grip was surprisingly firm. Go, Aemon said. Show them a different story. The haunted forest felt different when approached from the south. Jon had expected that. He had not expected how much. The trees seemed closer together here, their branches knitted like hands in prayer, heavy with frost. The light that filtered through was dull and blue, flattening colors. Snow lay in drifts, some crusted hard, some soft enough to swallow a man to the hip. The silence was thick, broken only by the crunch of boots and the distant caw of unseen birds. They had left Castle Black by the eastern gate under a white flag, a small party only: Jon, Robb, Tormund, Era, the then warrior who had ridden south with them, and a handful of Stark guards, no more. Ghost and gray wind ranged ahead, their pale shapes weaving between trees. One came as well, his massive form both shield and target. They'll see you coming from half a league, Tormund had said. Good. Let them know we didn't slink. Mance Rayder scouts had found them first. Shadowy shapes flickering between trunks, buckskins and bones and painted faces. Tormund had called out, naming himself and Jon, demanding parley. Now, in a small clearing scooped from the woods, they faced the king beyond the wall. Mance stood wrapped in a cloak of mixed furs, a patchwork of different lives. His armor, pieced together from stolen bits of mail and plate, still sat comfortably on his frame. His hair had more gray in it than when Jon had last seen him, his beard a little fuller, but his eyes were the same, keen, weighing, with a dry humor at the edges. Tormund, he said, I wondered what sort of trouble you'd gone to make. I didn't expect you to bring a wolf king and a crow in the same breath. He looked Robb over, taking in the crown, the armor, the posture. Then his gaze flicked to Jon. Snow, he said, you've been busy. Busy not dying, Jon said. And trying to keep others from the same. Rattleshirt, with his grizzly bone armor, made a disgusted sound. He's betrayed us, he said to Mance. Rode south, brought Nealer armies. Now he comes back like a dog that's eaten from 2 bowls. If I'm a dog, Jon said, then I chose to bite the same enemy from both sides. You chose to break your word, the then chief said softly. His eyes were hard as chips of flint. You sat in our camps and spoke as one of us. Now you stand with a crown at your side. I stand between, Jon said, because someone must or we all fall. Mance raised a hand, silencing further mutters. Let him speak, he said. Then we'll decide what to call him." Robb stepped forward, gray wind at his heel. The direwolf's growl was low but constant, his eyes never leaving the wildlings across the stone-marked line in the snow. "I am Robb Stark," he said, "King in the North. I did not come here to fight you, Mance Raider. That will happen at the wall soon enough if we cannot find another way. I came because my brother told me the truth of what walks in your wake." Mance's gaze shifted slightly. "The dead," he said. "The dead," Robb agreed. "Whites, White Walkers, whatever name you give them. I've seen their work in burned villages south of the wall. I've seen men I trusted bleed to death at the hands of men who thought politics more important than lives. I will not see the North drowned in both blood and ice if I can help it." He drew a breath. "You want to get your people south. I want my people to live long enough to see another spring. The Watch wants to hold their wall. All of those wants can't happen if we cling to what we've always done." Mance studied him. "And what are you offering?" he asked. "We've had offers from southern kings before. They all sounded fine if you stood at the right distance. Up close, they smelled of chains." "No chains," Jon said. "Land." The word hung in the air like a spark. "Land in the gift," Robb said. "And in the hard places beyond it where my southern lords have never managed to coax more than a few pitiful crops from the ground. Forests, hills, ruins you can make your own." "In exchange," Jon said, "your people come through the wall in smaller groups under watch. Those who agree to certain terms. No more raiding our farmers, no more stealing women from their beds. Will be allowed to stay and hold what they work. Those who just want to pass further south to warmer lands can try their luck with the southern kings. But here in the north we make a pact." Mance's brow furrowed. "What terms?" he asked. "Say it plain." "You fight," Jon said. "When the dead come, when the White Walkers bring their storm down from the far north, you'll stand with the Night's Watch and with the North. Your spears on the wall, your giants in the yards, your archers on the towers. No slipping away in the night to save only your own. We live or die together." A murmur went through the wildlings behind Mance. Some scoffed, others looked thoughtful, eyes dark as the trees. "And you think your lords will agree to this?" Mance asked Robb. "These proud men who spit when they say wildling? You'll share their halls with us? Their daughters." "The halls are theirs," Robb said. "I'm not asking you to march into Carhold and claim Lord Karstark's chair. I'm saying we can find land we can spare now if it means we'll have men when we'll need them. There's more empty ground in the north than there are people to fill it with all we've lost." "Empty ground," Tormund echoed. "Sounds like home." Mance's lips twitched. "And the Watch?" he asked. "What do they say? They've been bleeding themselves thin holding that ice for centuries. You think they'll thank you for bringing their old enemies inside their walls?" "They don't thank me for much," Jon said wryly. "But Maester Aemon sees the truth. Some of the brothers do too. Ser Alliser is less convinced. But once they see your people fighting beside them against the dead, not against them, they'll have to reckon with it." "And if they don't?" the then asked. "Then they'll find themselves guarding a wall that has more men on its walkway than they could have dreamed," Jon said. "And all of them will be needed when the worst comes. They can grumble about wildlings all they like while they knock arrows and light pitch." Silence stretched. Snowflakes drifted between them, lazy and fat. Finally, Mance lifted his head, looking past Jon and Robb, toward 1-1. "What do you think?" he asked in the old tongue. The giant rumbled a reply that sounded like stones grinding. Tormund chuckled. "He says," Tormund translated, "that he's tired of walking, that if the kneelers will let him sleep by a fire and not try to stick him with spears every time he scratches his arse, he'll smash as many dead men as they like." Mance's mouth curved. Hard to argue with that. He looked back to Jon, to Robb. "I became king beyond the wall because I wanted to give my people a chance," he said. "A chance to live. Not for glory, not for conquest. For children not to freeze or rise with blue eyes." His gaze sharpened. "If I agree to this, if I tell them to trust you, Some will say I bargained their freedom for comfort. You'll be bargaining it for survival, Jon said. There's no freedom in being dead. Mance studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. We'll need terms in more than words, he said. We'll need places named, numbers counted. We'll need to see the gates opened, not just hear promises that they will be. They'll open, Robb said. I'll see to it, and if my lords balk, they'll look into the haunted forest and see your host. Then they'll look up and see the dead. Mance's eyes were very tired when he smiled. If the dead don't come, he said, your plan makes you a fool and me a traitor to my people. If the dead don't come, Jon said, then we're both fools in a world that's kinder than it looks. I'll take that. Mance let out a breath that misted the air. Very well, he said. We have a beginning. The wind shifted. One moment it was merely cold, threading through the trees with a familiar sigh. The next it carried something else. A razor edge, a smell like metal and old, dry snow. The temperature seemed to drop a dozen degrees in a heartbeat. The hairs on Jon's arms rose under his furs. Ghost's head snapped up. Gray Wind's growl started low and climbed until it was a rumble in Jon's bones. One straightened, nostrils flaring. Feel that? Tormund murmured. Jon did. It was the same feeling he'd had at the Fist of the First Men, when the Whites had come in the dark. The same he'd felt at Craster's Keep, when the dead thing had clawed its way back to life on the floor. The forest fell abruptly silent. No bird calls, no creak of branches, only the wind, moaning now like something wounded. Then the horn blew. It was not the Watch's horn, no long note, no pattern that said riders or wildlings. This was a sound older and deeper, a hollow, bone-shaking tone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It made Jon's teeth ache. Mance went very still. No, he whispered. Not now. Blue light flickered between the trees. Shapes emerged, at first only shadows, then more. Whites in a ragged line, their clothes in worse shape than any wildlings. Their skin gray or black with frost, eyes burning with a cold, unnatural blue. Behind them, more ranks. Behind those, Jon saw the White Walker, tall, thin as a spear, its armor a weird, organic thing that looked grown rather than forged. It stepped into the edge of the torchlight with slow, deliberate grace. Ice rimed its hair. Its eyes were twin stars of frozen fire. In its hand, it held a blade of crystal so clear it was almost invisible, save for the way it warped the air around it. Bugger me with a weirwood, Tormund breathed. That's an other if ever I've seen one. Men on both sides of the parley line fell back, instincts obliterating politics. Stark Guard and Wildling Raider alike brought up weapons, hands trembling. Back to the wall, Robb said, voice taut. We can't hold here. We need the wall at our backs. No time, Mance said. His gaze was fixed on the advancing dead. They'd overrun us before we took 10 steps. We stand. Here. You said you wanted proof. Jon thought wildly toward Robb and every lord who doubted. Here it is. He stepped forward, long claw coming free of its sheath with a sound like a promise. Ghost slunk to his side, teeth bared. Loose, Mance shouted to the wildling archers. Aim for the bodies. Take the legs if you can't take the heads. The first volley of arrows flew, a dark cloud against the brightening blue. They thudded into Whites, some knocking them back, some pinning limbs. The dead staggered, then came on. One arrow sank into a White Walker's chest and shattered like glass, the shaft falling in splinters. The White Walker raised its sword. The air around the blade hissed. Frost blossomed on the nearest tree trunks where its tip passed. Keep away from that one, Jon snarled. I'll take it. Alone, Robb said. Don't be a fool. You've never seen one fight, Jon said. I have. He remembered the White Walker at the Fist, its easy grace, the way its blade had sliced through ordinary steel as if it were nothing. Remembered Sam's story of dragonglass, of spear points that melted them. Longclaw was Valyrian steel. If the old tales were true, that might be enough. The Whites hit their line like a wave. They came with no battle cry, no hesitation. Only that eerie, relentless forward pressure. Stark guards jabbed with spears, cutting them down. Wildlings hacked with axes, severing limbs that kept twitching in the snow. Gray wind and ghost leapt, tearing out throats that did not bleed, ripping arms from sockets. A corpse in the remnants of a watch cloak lunged at Jon, fingers hooked like claws. He met it with long claw shearing through its neck. The body collapsed, but the head's eyes still burned, jaw working soundlessly in the snow. "Fire!" he shouted. "We need fire!" "Our fires are back at the wall," Robb grunted, driving his sword through a white's chest, then kicking it off. "We didn't bring torches to a parley with men we expected to see in daylight. Then cut them apart and throw the pieces into piles," Mance snapped. "We'll burn them later if we live long enough." The White Walker moved among its shambling vanguard like a lord among peasants. It seemed almost to glide over the snow, ice sword leaving a faint, freezing mist in its wake. Where it passed, whites straightened, their movements sharpening, as if its presence were a whip. It saw Jon. Their gazes met across the churned snow. A flicker of recognition crossed its strange, sharp face, the barest tilt of its head, as if remembering a gnat that had stung once and not been swatted. "Come on, then," Jon muttered. He stepped forward, away from the worst of the melee, carving a path with long claw. Ghost stayed at his heel, lips peeled back. "Snow!" Robb shouted. "Don't!" But he was already moving, and the White Walker turned fully toward him, curious, like a cat toward a mouse that had unexpectedly bared teeth. The White Walker moved with eerie grace, every step measured, as if it danced to music only it could hear. Jon's own breath rasped loud in his ears, steam blasting out with each exhale. His heart hammered so hard it felt like it might burst through his ribs. "Remember," he told himself, "fast. Don't let it touch your blade with anything but long claw." Snow swirled around them, driven by a wind that seemed to spin out from the walker's presence. Frost crawled up the trunk of a nearby tree in delicate, lethal patterns. Ghost snapped and darted, looking for an opening, forced back each time by the sheer cold radiating off the creature. Then they were within reach. The walker's sword came in low and deceptively slow, a lazy swipe that Jon barely turned aside. When the blades met, there was a sound like a bell being struck under ice. Frost bloomed along Longclaw's edge, then cracked and fell away in shards. The force of the blow drove Jon back a step. His arms tingled with numbness. "Strong," he thought, teeth gritted. "Stronger than it looks." He countered with a high cut aimed at its neck. The walker flowed aside, its joints bending in ways that made no sense, as if it were less bone and more some strange, jointless creature. Its sword flicked out, nearly taking Jon's hand off at the wrist. He jerked back, felt the whisper of deadly cold stir the hairs on his fingers. Ghost lunged, jaws aimed at the walker's leg. The creature moved no faster than it had before, but it moved in the right direction. A simple, efficient step aside that let Ghost's bite close on empty air. It swung its sword down in a casual arc to split the direwolf's skull. Jon threw himself between. The ice blade slammed into Longclaw with a shattering ring. The shock ran up Jon's arms like lightning. For an instant, the world narrowed to that single point of contact. Valyrian steel and ancient ice grinding, shrieking. Then the White Walker slid back, like a dancer resetting their place. Around them, the battle raged. Robb fought shoulder to shoulder with a wildling with a plaited beard, their blades moving in rough harmony. Mance shouted orders, his sword never still. Tormund laughed like a madman, each swing of his axe sending limbs flying. One scooped up handfuls of whites and flung them into the treeline, where they shattered against trunks. "Jon!" Robb yelled, cutting down a white that had been making for Jon's back. "Don't play with it." "I'm not," Jon grunted. He feinted left, then ducked under a counterswing that froze the air above his head. His lungs burned. His fingers felt stiff inside his gloves. He could feel the cold trying to worm its way into his bones. He remembered Sam's tale. dragonglass in the belly, how the walker had screamed and shattered. Valyrian steel might not be dragonglass, but it was old and made for killing things men had nearly forgotten. The walker came in again, this time faster. His sword darted for his midsection. Jon twisted, taking the cut along the edge of his cloak. The fabric went stiff, flash-frozen, then shattered where the blade touched it, trailing icy dust. If it had been flesh, he would have died in that instant. He dropped low, slashing for its legs. The walker hopped lightly, impossibly, clearing the blade. Its free hand lashed out, fingers closing around Jon's forearm. Cold. Not just the north, but the realms of men, Jon finished, his finger resting on the inked line of the wall. The parchment beneath his glove crinkled softly. Someone had spilled wine on it months ago, leaving a dried, reddish-dyed mark over the neck. It looked almost like old blood. The tent was close and crowded, thick with breath and the smell of damp wool and steel. Lanterns hung from the central pole and from hooks in the support spars, their yellow light bending around the curved canvas. Outside, the river muttered under the bridge stones. The twins slept uneasily under new masters. Robb stood opposite Jon, palms braced on the table. The crown on his brow glinted as the lantern flame wavered. His gaze tracked from the wall down to the south, to the painted lions crouched over the rock in King's Landing, then back again. Between, so small on the hide that a fingertip covered it, lay Winterfell. The realms of men, he repeated. Father said once that the South never truly believed in what lay beyond the wall. Stories, they think. Tales to frighten children. Even when word reaches them of dead men walking, they'll squabble over whose messenger was rudest instead of listening to the message. Their folly's not our problem, growled the great Jon. His big fist thumped the table, rattling a few carved pieces. We've Lannisters to gut, Freys to watch, Greyjoy rats to smoke out of your halls. This talk of white shadows. I saw the whites last night we burned in the yard, but that's for the crows, not us. Our duty is to the north. Our duty is to our people, Robb said. His voice did not rise, but it cut through the room all the same. And if what Jon says is true, if there are more of those things shuffling through the snows than we've seen yet, then pretending the wall is a story won't keep them from our doors. They'll come for free folk first, Tormund said. Always have. Crows, cold, the dead. They all find us before they find you tower dwellers. He jabbed a thumb at the map, at the vast blankness north of the wall that men of the south liked to label simply haunted forest. But this time, there's more of us marching away from them than waiting to be plucked off. You shove us back into those woods, we'll die there. You give us room in your hills and your empty fields, we'll die on your walls instead. Might even take a few blue-eyed bastards with us. Era folded her arms, the leather of her jerkin creaking softly. We've seen more whites these last years than in all my grandmother's stories, she said. The old women in our tents talk like they did before the first long night. I don't care one goat's turd for your iron chairs and your lion kings, but I care that my grandchildren don't end up with ice in their veins. If that means standing on a northern wall next to a man with a wolf on his banner instead of a raider with a bone in his hair, I'll do it. Roose Bolton's pale eyes slid from Jon to Tormund to Robb, assessing, calculating. Your Grace, he said mildly. It is one thing to avoid being murdered in a Frey hall, another to suggest we unmake an enmity of thousands of years in a single winter. Your lords won't like this. Many won't obey. They have blood feuds old as the first men with these people. Blood feuds older than you, Flayer, Tormund said cheerfully. And I'm still here. They didn't finish the job then. They won't now if they've sense. Enough, Robb snapped, though faint humor ghosted his mouth. Lord Bolton speaks partly true. I can't force men to take wildlings into their halls at sword point and expect peace afterward. But I can place my own men where they're needed. Claims on the gift, holds along the wall that answer to Winterfell. If the watch cannot hold, someone must. The gift belongs to the watch, the Blackfish said. In law, if not in fact. In fact, it lies half empty and poorly tilled, Jon replied. "The watch can't work it. They've barely the men to guard their own gates. Give them more hands. Men who know cold, who can hunt where southern farmers wouldn't last a week. Let the watch have the oaths. Let the north have the spears. The land cares little whose name is inked on a scrap of parchment if no one's there to sow it." Bolton's fingers tapped once on the table. "And you trust these free folk to swear to a northern king? To hold a line rather than slip away into raiding? They'll swear to survival," Jon said. "To fires that stay lit and children who don't wake with frost in their lungs. Give them villages they can hold in their own fashion, with a hand of the king in the north." His mouth twitched. The old southern term sounded different wrapped in northern chill. To answer to when things go wrong. Men like Tormund, Era. Those your lords can stand to treat with. "And the crows?" asked one of the lesser lords. Serwyn, perhaps, or Tallheart, Jonas or Helman, brown-bearded, brow furrowed. "Night's Watch has old ways, old pride. They won't like us meddling." "I'll speak to them," Jon said. "To Lord Commander Mormont, if he still lives. To Maester Eamon. To Sam, if he's made it back from the fist." The thought of his friend's round, worried face twisted something inside him. "It was for them I went out beyond the wall. For the watch. They may yet hear that, beneath the fur." Silence settled, thick and uneasy. The lantern nearest the tent's pole popped as some impurity in the oil burned away, sending up a brief, sharp scent. Robb looked slowly around the circle, at the Grachan's stubborn set jaw, at Bolton's hooded stare, at the Blackfish's wary pragmatism, at Era's blunt resolve, at Tormund's irreverent grin. "I ask a great deal of you," he said finally. "I ask you to bend old hatreds to a new need. I ask you to share your land, your food, your walls with men you once called raiders. I ask you to fight a war most of the South won't even admit is real. You're the king in the North," the great Jon rumbled. He scratched his beard, then nodded once, a gesture as heavy as a hammer blow. "You ask, we answer. That's how it works. I don't have to like it, but I'll stand where you tell me to stand when the dead come. And if these goat humpers beside us know how to put a spear through a white's eye better than my own lads, I'll not spit on the help." One by one, other lords gave their reluctant assent, some with more grace than others. Even Bolton inclined his head, though his mouth was a thin line. "I'll do as my king commands," he said, "and see what skin we can save." "Then it's settled for now," Robb said. He straightened, the lantern light catching in his crown, turning the rough iron points into a dark halo. "We reorder the crossings here. We leave a garrison we can trust. Then we turn our banners north. Winterfell first, the wall next. After that, Jon said, we see what's left of the world." That night, when the councils had dispersed and the fires in the fry halls burned low, Jon lay wakeful in a borrowed chamber that smelled of damp stone and old rushes. Ghost was a white weight at his feet, breath slow and steady. The sounds of the twins seeped through the walls. A guard's cough, the distant splash of river against stone, the clank of chains as someone adjusted the drawbridge for the night. He should have been exhausted. His muscles ached from battle, his mind from too much talking. Too many eyes on him that belonged to men who had once thought him little more than a shadow in their lord's hall. Yet sleep hovered just out of reach like a shy animal. When it came, it did not bring him back to Fry Stone. He found himself once more on the wall. Wind howled along the top of it, razor sharp, stealing breath, skimming tears from the corners of his eyes. The ice under his boots glowed faintly in the starlight, blue-white, veins and fractures running through it like the memory of a river frozen mid-torrent. Below, on the northern side, fires burned in clusters, dozens, hundreds, a whole sky fallen to ground. Mance's host, tents and lean-tos and open-air camps, the flicker of flames moving over figures hunched against the cold. Children's thin cries rose, carried on the wind as if by some cruel hand. Dogs barked. Somewhere, a horn moaned, long and low. Beyond them, in the treeline, something moved. Shapes glided between the trunks, too smooth for men, too silent. The dark itself seemed to pause in their wake. Where their pale faces turned toward the wall, the cold sharpened. Jon could feel it even in the dream, a knife point pressing at the skin of the world. He set his hands on the wall's rim, palms freezing to the ice. "We're coming," he told them, though the wind whipped the words away. "We're coming with men and wolves and giants and wildlings and northmen and whatever else we can scrape together. We won't leave it to the watch alone this time. We won't pretend your stories." Far below, a ripple passed through Mance's camp. In the dream, Jon's sight slipped closer, swooping like a crow on the wind until he could make out the king beyond the wall himself, standing near a fire. Mance's cloak was drawn tight, his face turned toward the looming bulk of the wall. His eyes were narrowed, thoughtful. Beside him stood a figure in black, shorter, rounder. "Samwell?" Jon's heart leapt, then stuttered. "No, just another crow, another stranger." Dreams gave him no easy reassurances. Mance lifted his hand. A horn by his side sounded 3 short notes. Not the 3 that meant others, no dread there, only weary command. Men stirred, grudgingly, putting out some fires, banking others. They were conserving fuel, preparing to wait. "They're not moving yet," Jon murmured to himself. "Good. Stay. Give us time to mend what's broken." The dream wrenched. He was flying south now, carried on black wings past endless miles of snow and stone and forest, past ruined villages like the one where they had found the whites, past holds half empty of men, their women peering out through shutters at the sound of distant rumors, past White Harbor, its harbor frozen at the edges, ships moored in uneasy lines, past the next bogs, where crannogmen watched the world through reed blinds, reeds stirring like fingers. The wall diminished behind him. Ahead, the twins appeared briefly, their towers black against a milky river. On one parapet, a new banner snapped now beside the old. A gray direwolf over the twin towers, stitching fate together in threads of necessity. Beyond, in the dream's racing span, Winterfell bloomed on the horizon. Not the blackened, smoking ruin Jon had heard of from deserters and ravens. The training yard he remembered lay in blue shadow, the great hall's roof intact, though scarred. Men moved along the walls, torches in hand. Snow blanketed the godswood, the red leaves of the heart tree stark against it. And then, further still, another wall of a different sort. The blank space of the south, where men crowded and schemed in cities that had never seen a single white shadow and would swear the North's tales were lies. A raven's wings beat beneath him, steady, determined. In its beak it held a tight-rolled scrap of parchment, bound in thin leather, sealed with dark gray wax stamped with a howling direwolf. As Jon watched, the bird arrowed toward Castle Black's wooden towers. He saw himself there, standing below, in blackened fur, watching it come in. He saw Maester Aemon's blind face lift, as if he, too, could feel the message cutting the air. He saw Sam. This time it was truly Sam, fumbling with the knot, chubby fingers clumsy, tears freezing on his cheeks as he read words from a king he'd never expected to have to understand. "We live," Robb had written, "in the waking world before the letter took on ink in the dream. We live because we listened. Now we ask the same of you." The dream folded in on itself like wings closing. Jon woke with the taste of cold iron in his mouth and the distant echo of a horn in his ears. Ghost lay heavy across his ankles, eyes half open, watching him in that unervingly knowing way of his. "Soon," Jon whispered into the dark. His breath smoked in the chill air of the Frey chamber. "We've bought a little time, that's all. Soon we ride north. Soon we stand on that wall again. And this time we won't be alone." Ghost's tail thumped once, soft against the mattress. Outside, beyond stone and river and mist, dawn was only the faintest paling at the horizon's edge. The world still lay mostly in shadow. But somewhere high above the green fork, a raven was already cutting the air, winging its way toward ice and old oaths, bearing the weight of a king's new promise and a bastard's defiance of the future he had once seen in his sleep.